Hello, and welcome to the Science on 7th live stream, a virtual space where we talk about topics related to air quality and health. I'm your host, Pallavi Pant, and this week is being celebrated as the Open Data Day through events around the world. And within the air quality space, access to air quality data, whether it is to make personal decisions on whether to go out for a walk or a run, or to make decisions about when to release public advisories is really critical. We've seen in recent events, including in the fires in the Los Angeles area in the US, or other related air pollution events in countries like India and Pakistan and Bangladesh in recent months, as well as in Central Asian countries, that availability and access to data can really make a difference in how we deal with air pollution. So today, I'm really excited to be welcoming two guests who have been working on access to air quality data, who've been working on open data, and we'll hear more from them about these issues and how open data can be helpful. I'm very pleased first to welcome Chris Hagerbaumer. She's the executive director of OpenAQ, and she has worked in the nonprofit sector for nearly 3 decades across many organizations, and she's led OpenAQ for over 2 years now. And I also have the pleasure of working with Chris in my capacity as the chair of the OpenAQ governing board. So I'm particularly thrilled to have her join us today. Welcome, Chris. Really glad you could join us.
Thank you so much for having me today, Pallavi. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So I'm going to start with the basics. When we think of open data and air quality data, what is it that we are talking about? How do we define open data in the context of air quality?
Well, since it is Open Data Week and there's lots of discussion about open data generally, I'd like to start with actually the broad definition of fully open data, which the textbook definition is data that's freely accessible, that can be used, reused, and redistributed for any purpose without restrictions. Of course, some listeners might be like, but data should be, some data should be private. And of course, data with confidential or individual or commercial information shouldn't be shared. Or let's say there was a pod of endangered fish somewhere, you wouldn't want to tell people where they were because fisher people could go after them. So some data should definitely be private. But when it comes to air quality, people have a right to know what they're breathing. The air we breathe, it's a common resource that all of us share. And a measurement of air quality at any given time or place, it's a factual measurement. And really, perhaps the most important thing where what OpenAQ is coming from is that if you hoard or keep air pollution closed, that really impedes the development and implementation of solutions. When we make air quality data open, it allows everybody, whether they're in the private sector, the public sector, the civil society sector, to use that data to advance clean air. So examples are, say, you're a scientist conducting an epidemiological study, a researcher determining what's that source of pollution. You're a journalist or another communicator expanding awareness about how dirty the air is, how bad it is for our health, or an entrepreneur or someone building a forecasting model to tell us what's the air quality going to be in the next few days. So when we invite all these innovators in, we get a diverse set of knowledge, skills, experiences, and diversity leads to innovation. And then when we involve a lot of people in something, there's more buy-in. So the solutions are more durable, they last longer. So when we think of air quality data today, some of it's held completely privately, some is shared partially, and some is made completely open. So maybe you could share the slide I have about data to be maximally open. Yeah, so basically that means that for data to be maximally useful, you have to share it in physical units, like particulate matter is micrograms per cubic meter. an AQI is not physical units. You need to share the station-specific data and coordinates. So like, where is this actually located, this monitoring system? And it should be as timely as possible. So like, you wouldn't want to, a yearly average released months later is just not going to be as useful. And then by programmatic access, what I mean is that a computer can basically read it. So if you easily and timely way. So like if you have a PDF and you bury it deep in a government website, well, that's not going to be as useful for folks. It's going to be really hard to get that data and put it together with other data. So our role at OpenAQ is to find all of that data that we can, open data, and share it with the world. We aggregate the data, we harmonize it for ease of use because it comes in really disparate formats, and we make it available on a one-stop shop. So we're basically democratizing access to air quality data so all of those people I talked about earlier can be part of solving that problem.
Thank you so much, Chris, for walking us through this. And, I remember the very early days of OpenEQ when it was, one station and then 5 and then 15. And I feel like there has been a lot of progress in the last almost decade to try and expand how, data availability is. But also there has been progress in terms of where monitoring is being conducted. And OpenAQ has actually published a report on this very topic, the global air quality landscape, and also where do we see improvements in monitoring, how much of the world is currently experiencing or has access to air quality data. So for those of us who may not have read the report yet, can you give us a highlight reel? Just what are the top 2 or 3 really notable findings that you would want the listeners to know?
Sure. So this report, Open Air Quality Data, the Global Landscape, we've published, this will be our 3rd version, published in December of 2024. And it's examining whether national governments are monitoring air quality, and then to what extent they're publicly sharing that air quality data that they generate. So if you could show, this the next slide here, this is kind of boils it down. So we looked at 198 countries and then large territories of larger than 1 million and examined them for these 2 questions I just mentioned. And we found that 64% are generating air quality data on a regular basis, but that means that 36% are not, which is unfortunate. We added up that populations of those countries where there isn't government monitoring, and we found that nearly 1 billion people are living where their national government isn't collecting information on one of the greatest external threats to their health. And 9 out of 10 of those billion people are living in low income or lower middle income countries. So the graph, that's the big thing there. So there's a real lack of monitoring in some places, and the poorest among us are suffering from that. And then that graph further demonstrates that spectrum of openness that I mentioned earlier. 10% of countries, of all countries, are monitoring, but not sharing the data that they generate. And then it's about half and half as to whether those that are sharing, are they sharing it partially or are they sharing it fully? So if we say that 27% are sharing that data fully, that means that it's just barely over a quarter of the world's countries where there's that open access to maximally useful air quality data. I'll add that we're also releasing some region-specific one-pagers within the next month. So I'll just give an example of your next speaker's region, which is Latin America and the Caribbean. There, 64% of countries are monitoring, 41% are sharing the data, and 12% are sharing the data in a fully open, transparent manner. So I hope everybody takes a look at the full report. I think you have a link, and you can look forward to the specific region-specific one-pagers soon.
Thank you very much, Chris, for walking us through this. And since you mentioned our next speaker, and we know that, from the data you were just sharing with us, that there is still a big gap in terms of access to data or even places that are monitoring data. we thought it would be helpful to hear from someone who is actively working to address that gap. So I would now like to welcome Rafaela Borchi, who is joining us from Brazil. She's an environmental engineer and the co founder and CEO of Iris, which is a green tech startup. And as part of this startup, she works on developing low cost air pollution monitoring systems. And she is also currently pursuing a master's degree. And using her research and work at the startup together to improve air quality monitoring and access to data in Brazil. So, Hafa, we are really excited to have you join us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Balavi. Thanks for having me here. Hi, Chris. And well, I appreciate the invitation.
Great. And I will mention that Hafa is also an OpenAQ community ambassador. So I'm really glad we're getting this very full circle, of the OpenAQ community. But since Hafa, I think you're the first person to be joining us on this live stream from Brazil. We're really excited and would love to hear a little bit about the status of air pollution in Brazil. What is it like? What are some of the biggest concerns? Can you paint a picture for us?
Well, of course. Air quality here, it's a complex issue, so that's kind of tricky question. And mainly because we're dealing with a vast country. So we have several challenges, and I guess the biggest one we have is that we actually don't know the full extent of the problem here, simply because monitoring is very uneven across the country. So I brought some graphs that I can show you, and then I can put in more in perspective here. So this is data from a project that we're conducting with the Ministry of the Environment here in the Federal University of Santa Catarina. And we're conducting a report on air quality monitoring that is going to be released in a few weeks. You can then look in the social media and look for it. So Brazil has a total area of 8.5 million square kilometers. And even though by the year of the report, we found more than 400 monitoring stations, which are the technology we use to get air quality data here and everywhere. Only 0.2% of the territory is covered by reference stations. So this means that 5% of our cities has this network. So it's difficult to say if the air here is good or bad. And you can see there we also have some active stations, some inactive ones. And we can see the differences between regions and states and how the stations are distributed in the country. But I can give you some examples. Like São Paulo is one of the largest monitoring network that we have here in the country. And the network covers both metropolitan region and interior, which is very important because the land use is very different here. And then we can have a better picture of what is happening there. Many stations regularly exceed pollution levels in the states, especially for PM 2.5, PM10, and ozone. And in the year of the report, 40 of 53 stations recorded ozone levels above the legal threshold. So that's very worrying. But when we compare to other states like Santa Catarina, which is my state where I live, by the time of the record, we only had 3 stations. So we can't say properly what was happening in the state because these 3 stations were in the same city. Now we have 4, but in the time we had only 3. So it's hard to tell. If you look at the states with strong monitoring, you think air pollution is a major issue because we can constantly see those violations. But in states with limited monitoring, the lack of exceedances could mean 2 things. Whether the air is cleaner, which I don't believe that, we can't believe that properly, or we just don't have enough data to detect the problem, which was what Chris was saying. So yeah, I think that says a lot about Brazil. And then you can turn to the other picture, to the other graph. And here we can see the difference too in the technology. So when we use the reference stations, it's different than using indicative ones that use low-cost sensors. The low-cost sensors are incredible technology, and we need to indeed improve the technology. But in Brazil, this is still used just for research. So now the number of stations are even smaller than we think it was. So yeah, I can give you a resume about Brazilian status.
Amazing. This is, really helpful to know. And I think increasingly many countries are looking like this, where there's a mix of reference grade, more expensive monitoring stations, and then also lower cost sensor networks that can be useful in understanding what is the scope of the problem and trying to map it out across larger regions. I'm also curious about the name of your organization. It is Iris, and I'm wondering how you got on this path of setting up a green tech startup focusing on air quality. And I hear from the grapevine that there's a really interesting meaning behind the name Iris. So I would love for you to share with us that as well.
Yeah, well, with Iris, our idea building this startup that develops locally low-cost sensors is to fill the gap that we have here, not to replace the reference stations or anything because we need them, but allow denser monitoring in low and middle income countries or in countries with a vast territory as ours. So that's the idea behind Iris. And the name, I think, describes this mission very well. So the Iris name is related to our eye, our vision properly. And since we want to show people what they cannot see, like the pollution is something invisible, something people don't talk about often here. So until now, until Iris, because with the right data, with the right technology, it is possible to see the problem and also to see the change. So we show people the problem of air quality, air monitoring, and everything that happens in the country, but we also provide them with a solution, with a hope, with a perspective. So that's the reason of our name and our startup itself.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I feel like over the last again like 5 to 7 years, I would say there are so many organizations. Like we could spend the entire day on this live stream talking about similar initiatives in different parts of the world. In fact, in February, we hosted someone from Central Asia who's doing similar things. They're not creating low-cost monitoring systems, but they're setting them up across Central Asian countries to gather data. And I think there's a little message of hope and progress there. So Chris, if I can come back to you, you said you've done this report about 3 times now, and you look at countries around the world. Have we seen progress in recent years in terms of availability of more monitoring or better access to data? And are there any specific examples that jump out at you that more of us should know about?
There's been a little bit of progress since our last report. There's a net increase in monitoring of 3%. Unfortunately, some countries have had to stop monitoring. Armed conflict is an example, but typically it's lack of technical support or funding. On the sharing piece, we found some countries sharing more, but some sharing less, kind of canceling each other out. But, actually, that was just sharing in general. But there has also been some increase in that of the provision of maximally useful data from 23% to 27%. But I just want to share the barriers, and I think it's really resource constraints for the most part, like lacking technical resources or financial resources. And as you can imagine, this is typically the case in the global south, where countries are less resourced. But there is a lot of ingenuity out there. Like some countries don't have access to the resources to set up the technical way of sharing. So they're using social media to share their AQIs, their air quality indexes. And And AQI, that's not necessarily useful for all of those use cases that I mentioned, but it is the clearest way to inform the public about the quality of the air at any given time. There's also examples of interregional efforts to support air quality monitoring, like ICIMOD. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development that serves the Hindu Kush Himalaya region, and they're helping the countries in that region monitor. Also, in air quality, Central Asia is another example. It's serving Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan. And there's also international bodies that are stepping in to provide greater technical support, like the UN-convened Climate and Clean Air Coalition. It released its Air Quality Management Exchange platform, AQMX for short, last September. I know you're part of that, Pallavi. And so anyway, there's all these barriers, so this is why in our report, our recommendation is that funders, like development banks and philanthropies, they step up to the plate to support these less resourced governments, because getting monitoring into these countries is so important. And we also, because we're about open data, we suggest that they include conditions for data transparency in those funding agreements so that we get the greatest value out of that data.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And for anyone who's listening in and wondering what AQI is, it refers to the Air Quality Index, and it is a very common way that governments often share data on air quality. It's essentially a color-coded index, goes from green to shades of red. Green is good, yellow is when you start to worry, reds is when the pollution levels are high, and there's usually health advisories that go with them. And I'll just mention really quickly that we spoke about AQMX in our December live stream. So if you're interested in learning more, please check that out. But one of the comments I just saw, coming in from Collins online, and also something that has been a really important topic for many people, and Chris, you just referred to this as well, is in many low and middle income countries, the challenges are not just the access to technology, but even things like not having a reliable power source, which can keep your sensor going, and not having the right people who can service the instruments at the appropriate time. And I'm curious, if any of you or both of you would like to add any, thoughts or things that you may have, Hafa, for instance, you may have experienced in your own work. I was just speaking with some colleagues a couple of weeks ago who have air quality monitor, reference grade monitor in Nairobi, and they could not monitor data for almost 1 year because the pump of their instrument broke down and there was no way to fix it. And then they had to essentially import it into the country. And that process was so long that for almost a whole year, they had no data. So I'm wondering if you've come across those types of challenges and, any comments you want to share on that.
Yeah, that unfortunately that happens a lot. Here we have some challenges in technical support. We don't have operators for the stations. So there's a lot of gaps in the data that we collected last year, and that's mostly due to that. Technical support is very hard here. But I see very important steps being taken by the Ministry of Environment here in Brazil. We have now the new national air quality policy, so the ministry is working really hard to give these assistances to the states and using the universities to help them to build these documents on emissions, on air quality network reports, and giving the information to the population. So I'm kind of expecting good things in the future now that we put air quality in the conversation, because it didn't happen like last year, whatever.
That's very encouraging to hear. So I'm hoping that we can continue to hear more about the Brazil example and how other countries and cities might learn from it. Chris, any additional reflections or thoughts from you on this topic?
I mean, it's It's true. It's very difficult in certain places of the world, in certain regions where you may not have internet service, and so some or access to consistent electricity. Some monitors, there are some of the lower cost sensors out there that do have solar capacity. So there are ways that people are trying to think through this and help out the places where it's more difficult to do air sensing.
Yeah, and this to me at least also is such a clear example of why we need really transdisciplinary collaborations on this topic. It's not going to be just the air quality scientists. It's not going to be just the developers and coders. It's not going to be just the engineers. We really need everyone to contribute to this and collaborate on this together. Another question I have, and this is one of my favorite questions to ask people, is it's clear to me based on all the work you've been doing in our conversation that you're very passionate about work on air quality and you really want to see progress happen. I'm curious how your career has led you to this point. What motivated you? Is there a reason that you started working on this topic? So, Chris, maybe I'll start with you and then go to Hafa.
My siblings tell me that when I was in high school, I put a timer in the shower. Like, you can't take a shower longer than this. And they say it was my environmental bent. Maybe it was just because there were a lot of us. And so you only wanted to give people so much time. But I've always been an environmentalist, right? So I've always believed that we need to protect our planet because we as human beings cannot thrive if our water is dirty, if toxics are coming into our body in many ways, including the air. We have to be able to breathe clean air, drink clean water, have clean land, or we suffer, right? So I mean, I've just for my whole life basically worked with NGOs on these issues, particularly where there's that intersection with human health. And as we know, air quality, it's the second largest external factor for death and other health problems worldwide. So I couldn't think of really anything more important to work on.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Chris. I think I can relate to everything she said. I really bothers me how people see the environment and the relationship between people and the environment, as they see it like they don't need the environment to survive, but it's everything that we have. So that's why I choose to do environmental engineering here. And by doing environmental engineering, I wanted to bring technology in the environment closer. So use data to improve people's lives, to improve our environment, and to improve our country that face a lot of challenges. Not only air quality, but air quality is where I belong, actually. And that's because of the data and the technology and the things that I like the most.
Fantastic. Well, I'm really glad that both of you chose to be in this space and are doing amazing work. To bring us to a close on this live stream, can you tell us one thing that gives you hope that we are moving in the right direction, and that we're going to continue to see progress? And Hafa, maybe I'll start with you this time and then go to Chris.
Okay. Speaking as a Brazilian and looking for our scenario here, now that I see more data open to the public and with strong policies being developed, I've seen real good steps toward change. So that motivates my work and motivates me. So the more people understand the impact of air pollution, the more we can push for solutions to protect the health and the environment. So I think that's the most important topic that we can take from today's sessions, in my opinion.
Well, I agree with Hafa as well. Like, we're seeing so many communities step up around the world and be interested in themselves taking this into their hands and doing air sensing. But on a broader, going back to broad, like I'm a stubborn optimist. And I believe that most people are good. They want good things for themselves, their families, the world. There's so many incredible young people out there who are doing incredible stuff. And there's someone, I like this, the recent quote that I heard was that we're all in this together and that nobody should let go of anybody's hand. For some reason, I just love that.
That is so amazing. I think that is what we really need to take away from this is none of us should let go of anyone's hands, and I think we need a lot more stubborn optimists out there. It is amazing to see the progress, and what I'm really taking away from this conversation is that it is slow, but we are seeing the trend moving in the right direction. Perhaps it is not as fast as we would like it to be. But as long as there's people like both of you in the space working towards solving this problem, we will continue to get more access to data and then use that data to make useful decisions. So Hafa and Chris, thank you so very much for your time today. We really appreciate that you could join us. And, I'm already feeling really energized after our conversation. And there is so much more to be done that I look forward to continuing our work, our collaborations, our conversations. And for everyone listening in, thank you very much. We will be back on Monday, April 7th with another conversation on air quality and health. And in the meantime, you can check out previous episodes or send us ideas for who you would like to hear from. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Paula.